All right, welcome to the second episode of Hey, Let's Art. That's what I decided to call it. And that's what it's going to end up being called, I guess. I mean, why not? The usual disclaimer, or I guess the second disclaimer that will probably be usual for future episodes, is that the sound quality is probably not ideal. It's not going to be ideal for a fairly long time, I guess. It's just not really a priority right now. The priority is to just sort of put something out and make something. And that's kind of the theme of the show, right? It's called Hey, Let's Art, a very imperfect program. That's what I sort of settled on. I don't know why I like blue and gray so much. I don't know if you recall, if you watched the last episode, which was I think about 2 weeks ago that I put that out. I pretty much just used this palette, and I guess it was probably just because it was there, but I think it's there for a reason. I think I just kind of end up going with that a lot of the time. Anyways, I hope that someday I'm going to be able to improve the sound quality. That's just something that we're going to have to live with for now. If by some chance I'm able to reach my first milestone on the Patreon, yes, I have a Patreon, I'm going to mention that again at the end, towards the sort of the second housekeeping part of the show. And I'm going to kind of give out a little bit more details on that. But if I do manage to get the first milestone, which I think is about $50 per thing that I make, I'm not actually too far from halfway there at this point, which is amazing. Shout out to everyone who supports me right now. You guys are awesome, and you know who you are. And it's amazing that there are people out there who actually, care about the work that I do and want to support it. It's a wonderful feeling, even if there's like one person out there in the world that feels that way, it's great. I think any artist in the world aspires to that from the very beginning. Um, but yes, to get back to my original point, if I do manage to get to about $50, I think I might try to invest in a few additional bits of equipment that should help me allow me to use my nicer microphone more freely, because right now it's almost too nice. It picks up the fan noise a little bit too zealously. It just does. It's just too good. It's too good for its own good. So I'm using something a little bit less sensitive to ambient noise. It still, unfortunately, will pick it up, but less so. So that's the initial disclaimer. Otherwise, I guess we can probably just dive right into the substance of the show if you're able to accept the imperfections of my voice and every filler, I'm sorry if I hurt anyone's ears right there. That was intentional. Now I feel really bad. I don't feel so bad if it's unintentional. But every tisk, every breath, every sigh, if I sneeze, hey, who knows? Maybe I'll edit that out. Maybe I won't. I don't know. So it's just gonna have to be a part of the experience. Okay, so let's just sort of jump right into it. I was sort of drawing as my first kind of initial doodle. I was drawing a weird little fruit here or something. I don't really know. This is just kind of to get me into the process, into the mood, I guess. And I do feel like today I maybe need to do that a little bit more actively. Some days you feel like doing stuff, and some days you really would rather just lie on the couch, and it's okay, it happens. In my particular case right now, I am, I suppose, closer to that second situation. I'm a little bit low energy, and I'm not necessarily a proponent of pushing yourself beyond your limits or anything like that. I just feel like right now, for me, this is going to be a healthy thing to do. Just kind of get out of that headspace, and do something that's hopefully going to end up being relaxing and productive. Because I do enjoy this sort of thing, and I do enjoy the sound of my own voice. Hopefully, I guess there's someone out in the world who enjoys the sound of my own voice, and that's me. I do enjoy talking, and I do enjoy doodling and painting, and it can be a challenge sometimes to motivate yourself to do, well, just about anything. And occasionally it's okay to vegetate, and it's okay to take care of yourself. I mean, it's very important to take care of yourself, I think. But it's that sound. Does it pick up that sound? That's a wonderful sound, isn't it? I love that little sound effect. And sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's also beneficial to do what you can. Just do what you can. So much of anxiety and the pain that comes around creativity and productivity has to do with what I think Zay Frank referred to as brain crack. Sort of ideas, unrealized ideas that are floating around in your head, but you haven't done yet, things you mean to do, things you want to do. And, you are maybe afraid of doing them because they are not going to turn out exactly like you want. They might sort of turn sour and kind of rot away. And ultimately, that's gonna end up hurting you more than the imperfection, that indecision, and that lack of doing. I think it's better to just get it out there, even if it's gonna be not so good. And again, this is probably something that I will talk about pretty much every single time, because I think that's kind of the idea. That's kind of why we're here. If you're here with me, just allow it to be relaxing if you need to. Like, I don't know what's going on right now. I don't know what's up with this fruit. Like, I had like a lighting scheme, and then I completely abandoned it. Like, there was supposed to be light coming from this direction, right? But now it's coming from this direction somehow. Now this is a problem, right? But then the shadow is falling over here. I don't know what's going on, right? So I could fix that, and I will right now, really quickly, because I can't. No, I can't live like this. No, I must fix it. Okay, so shadow. This is the shadow side of the planet, and then this is the light side. Notice how I'm trying to sort of create a texture by sort of emphasizing the differences in light and shadow and sort of the gaps in between. I don't know what this is, like a rock or a fruit, or maybe like an alien durian, like, the durian from that episode of Portlandia that comes to life. I think it's also going to be featured in the next game by Cyan Worlds. They're the ones who made Myst. Big inspiration for me. I think a magical space durian. It's like a fruit, like this sort of thing, right? It's a weird fruit. It like flies in and kidnaps you and takes you to space, and I'm behind that. I'm into that. I like that. I think that's a good idea. All right. So, but anyways, okay. So whatever. Now the light is like vaguely resolved. I don't really, this isn't our main thing today. This is just a doodle. So, we are going to get rid of it. We're just with all this stuff that I just did. I don't even care. I'm gonna open up a new painting. Don't save. I'm not even going to save this. The size is fine. It's landscape oriented around the size of my desktop, a little bit smaller in height. I'm going to go for canvas, and come on. I'm going to choose just basic canvas, so that emulates like a textured canvas. Let me see what other ones are available. Yeah, that's not so good. Fine. That's pretty okay. Rough, that's alright too. I mean, like, I don't really know what algorithm, if it like sort of randomizes the grain or what it does, or it's just like the feel of the oil paint tool, which is a tool that I like to use on the canvas surface. I think it's just a little bit better and a little bit more familiar. You can of course set this if you want, just if you're interested in this piece of software. It's about $40 or so. It's pretty good. It's a pretty good digital painting piece of digital painting software. If you're interested, you could just go with like smooth canvas, or I think special. No, it wasn't special. It was. Well, we'll find out. There's a setting here that I think that's called just digital smooth, which just creates it like, oh, there it is. I think it's art paper, right? Smooth digital, and it just sort of supposed to create like a surface that's 100% like just a digital surface. It doesn't emulate grain, but again, I'm just gonna go with basic canvas. I like it. All right. So that's our new setup, and today I'm actually going to use a reference. In ArtRage, there's a nice little feature. They have these little refs over here. There's references. There's a couple of different ways to do it. I think the one that I'm looking for is like a reference image. So I'm going to bring out a reference image from my desktop that I took this photograph actually. And there it is. Okay. And this is pretty nice. I can just drag it over here. I can zoom in a bit. I can rotate this. I'm not going to use layers too much, so I'm just going to stick it over here for now. And then I can kind of move around. And I took this picture because the clouds were pretty spectacular that day, and I just had to. And, you know, they were kind of... the sun was sort of starting to set over downtown area of my sort of hometown. Not necessarily a spectacular architectural display here, but all this sort of chaos that kind of happens in the rooftops is kind of interesting to me. And I think it'd make a good reference. We're not going to faithfully try to reproduce this. In fact, I might add quite a lot of different flourishes to this, but we're going to go with something like that. Now I'm going to also reduce the size of this. I'm going to move this over here. And I don't even know if the composition here is precise. I'm just going to I'm going to start with this being pretty small on the screen because I'm going to start with very, very large strokes. I'm just going to, yeah, there you go. This is about, yeah. So this is the kind of fun we're going to have here on Hey, Let's Art. We're just going to, move things around. We're going to zoom in and zoom out. And so here I'm going to start off with a bit of an impressionistic approach. And I think with something like this, where there's a lot of little things going on, and from where I'm sitting, I can't really see the fine details, but I know they're there. I know that there's all kinds of little details going on over here. And when we are dealing with something like that, I think it's very easy to become overwhelmed. And it's kind of natural, And there's a couple of different ways to approach this, and a couple of different ways, different goals to shoot for when you're doing something like this. Like, I'm gonna actually make this much bigger, So you could be shooting for a photorealistic rendition. You could be shooting for an impressionistic rendition, an expressionistic rendition. Who knows, right? But a lot of people sort of want to jump to the realism right off the bat, and even when you're doing realism, even if that is your ultimate sort of goal, yeah, this is the proportions are really not quite right here. So I'm actually going to bring this down quite a bit further. But even if your ultimate goal is a photorealistic image, which is definitely not the case here with me, you should be working impressionistically at the beginning, by which I mean you should be working with large shapes, kind of mocking things up, kind of trying to see where everything is. I don't even care the color. There's some clouds over here, whatever, right? That's just me. kind of trying to see where things are in relation to each other. If you want to get a perfect likeness, there are some measuring tricks you can kind of employ. They're a little bit difficult to demonstrate in a digital format, but essentially you'll kind of pick a single kind of measure and like, let's say this is my blah. I'm gonna actually make this a little bit more fine, right? This is just a random like line that I just drew here, right? And I can basically just use that random line, right? So this is roughly the same, right? Roughly the same size. And I could see how many of those lines fit into any given shape in the actual reality of the situation, right? You know, if you're not really an aficionado, let's say, if you ever seen like a movie or a show or a cartoon where a painter was working on a canvas outside with an easel, and they would like, you know, put out their hand, and sometimes they'd have a pencil in their hand, and sometimes they would just use their thumb, and you probably know that gesture. And then they kind of squint a little bit and close one eye. What they're doing there is they're actually just sort of establishing a measurement. They kind of pick, a lot of times it's very useful when you're doing figure drawing. Ooh, I'm getting so into the talking aspect of it, I actually am forgetting to paint a little bit. But yeah, when they do that, that's establishing a length or measurement that they can then use to sort of base the rest of the painting around. Um, Now, again, I'm sort of eyeballing it more so than that right now, especially since I can't really do that very well with digital. Although what I could do with digital theoretically is take this, paste this straight underneath the canvas, and then make it very transparent, so I could literally trace it. And you know, some people would say that that's cheating, but it really depends on your goal. If your goal is to get better at observational painting, then okay, yeah, that's probably cheating because you're not really gonna learn as well. But if your goal is to come out with a nice, relatively realistic image, then add like some of your own flair to it, let's say, then yeah, okay, why not? You know, speaking of that sort of feeling, since again I'm basically gonna lay bare all of my own insecurities. When I talk about insecurities here, when I talk about, you know, that fear of imperfection or that fear of failing or messing things up, I'm a lot of times it's pretty much just, you know, things that I have felt at some point. I think a lot of times people feel similarly. Again, now notice again what I just did here is this is not a good, this is not correct. What I just did here is this is way too far up. This whole shape, this whole, I mean, sorry, complex of shapes is a little bit too far up. So I'm basically having to make up stuff down here. And you know what? For today, I think I might actually go with that. We'll see. It might shift as it goes, because again, not looking for perfection. But one of the things that you can do by sort of marking out different lengths, and sometimes if you have a piece of paper, you would like put like a little cross in the middle or something, you know, to kind of figure out different quadrants and proportions, is you can kind of find different sort of markers, different spaces that will sort of serve as guideposts. But anyways, that's tangents. Tangents are my primary trademark. Um, so what was I going on about? Something about imperfections, probably, and insecurities, right? So one of the insecurities and imperfections is not using the right process, not doing something the way that the professionals do it, the correct way. And the other one, which is sort of the kind of maybe the other extreme, is also being kind of obsessed with result as opposed to process. The thing about that is that those are not mutually exclusive. You can pretty much feel both at the same time, and that's extremely frustrating because on the one hand, I'm actually just going to go and mock in the sky here. On the one hand, it's a nice blue. Yeah, why not? I mean, just, you know, this is just a general mock-up. I know there's blue here. little blue there. Notice I'm not throwing blue everywhere as a background. I'm just sort of actually kind of finding, just eyeballing the different colors that show up in the different parts of the sky. And yeah, that can become very infuriating because on the one hand, you want to do things a certain way, like this is the way it's done, right? You don't trace, or let's say if you're computer programming, you have to do it a certain, you have to make sure your code is very well documented and clean, whether or not it gets the job done. If you're painting, you want to make sure that, again, everything, the proportions are right, things like that. Now, that's, well, proportions maybe is a little bit more of a product than as opposed to process kind of thing. And there's a good reason to feel both of those things. I mean, obviously you want to do things as well as you can manage. You want to learn. You want to improve. But at the same time, you have to kind of both appreciate the learning and the making of mistakes, because that's part of the process. And sometimes you will develop your own ways of doing things that might not align with the way that you see in some instructional video. And you also might end up with something you don't super love, but you can appreciate the journey to get there. I mean, I think you sort of understand what I'm saying. It's that kind of tension between process and product. Let's just put it that way. Between being perfect, as a painter in the act of painting, and being perfect as a painter who produces paintings. Neither one of those things is achievable, by the way. You cannot. And again, as far as the act of painting, you just do your thing, man. Sometimes, I mean, like what I'm doing right now, probably not 100% recommended. Although a lot of it is pretty standard practice, like the fact that I'm sort of blocking out bigger shapes. And actually, this is maybe a little bit easier than if this was like, I mean, well. Okay, I don't want to say that, but it's maybe a little bit more straightforward in some ways than maybe a figure, let's say, because this is a cityscape, and cityscapes are kind of blocky. So we have a lot of straight lines, and those straight lines kind of automatically, create a sort of grid. And so we can follow that grid. We can kind of figure out alignments of things in relation to each other. And again, I'm just looking at a very tiny image in the distance right now. This is, again, not how you would do plein air painting at all, which means sort of painting out, in the world, in the air. But this is just sort of like a very, very extreme version of painting from observation, like impressionistically, because I notice that like something is starting to come together. It's resolving to a certain extent. My problem always is that things kind of start to come together. A lot of times they don't 100% get there, but especially with the limited time we have, that's not our priority here. Let's see. What can we do here? I mean, I kind of like some of the kind of like this if you squint. Interesting thing about Impressionists, the Impressionists, nowadays very highly respected and lauded historical figures. Obviously, if you are familiar with the history, they were not so well respected in their time. I mean, obviously, they were within certain circles, but the larger art world, the salon, as it was called back then, wasn't really into their whole thing. And one of the criticisms that they often got was simply that their paintings just looked like, regular paintings that weren't finished. And that kind of gets back to my point of how you start off. Even if your goal is photorealistic, you actually start off like an impressionist. You start off, this is probably what, or something similar to this, where you block out the large sort of segments, and then block out, figure out measurements and so on. Not sure why it's not really they're not really blending very well today. I'm not really sure why that's going on. It feels like it's sort of just it might just be because my thinners are a little bit. Yeah, that actually has got to be it probably. Um, but yeah, you kind of start off with blocking out large areas. I mean, in a way, maybe just trying to get rid of the white of the canvas. And I'm doing that without necessarily even always paying perfect attention to what I'm doing. There's a lot of pink in the sky that I really liked that evening. I think that's what I really responded to, is that beautiful contrast between pink and gray and blue. I think it was just really beautiful and kind of majestic, right? You don't really get that feeling of awe very often in the modern day. We're so jaded about everything, I guess. Everything is so, seen that, done that. I can experience all kinds of digital, virtual worlds at the press of a button. So it's nice to be able to feel sometimes kind of enraptured by something that sort of exists outside of deliberation, outside of the act of deliberation, outside of something that is to be corny, like a moment. It's nice. um, I'm just gonna I don't know. I'm just gonna get rid of the white here. Gonna put some. Don't want to do that. This is like a metallic slider. It makes tries to simulate metallic paint. Do not really use this unless you know what you're doing. If you use Art Rage, because it's not very. In my opinion, it just does weird things. This is a very strange approach. But honestly, you know what? Like, why not? Let's see what it does. Okay, great. See, it makes it look like metal. Maybe you want that. Maybe there's a good reason for that. I don't. But who knows, right? That could be useful for some particular project, or who knows? You could just be a metallic digital painter, and you would make a whole life out of that. Who knows? Maybe that's your whole thing, and a good thing. You know, um, like lots of people deride black velvet painting. I think black velvet painting can be amazing. There's some really great paintings on black velvet out there. Um, I There was a professor at my school. He wasn't my professor. I don't think I've ever had a class with him. Might as I mean I don't suppose there's any harm in like naming names. His name is Tony Shore. I don't know who he is, like what kind of person he is, or even what kind of professor he is. But he did that kind of work, sort of. On purpose, I suppose. There was a little bit of I suppose, intentional tongue-in-cheek aspect to that. Like black velvet painting or painting on black velvet is considered sort of a little bit quote-unquote trashy, and sort of lower class, like people who would hang like pictures of Elvis in black velvet on their walls maybe would be considered to be quote-unquote people who didn't appreciate like fine art. They were decorative. It was decorative art at best, and kind of like kitschy, at worst. And those are things that are sort of those are perceptions that people have about black velvet painting, and he sort of played into that by, or I guess maybe played against that by doing these really compositionally complex, figurative paintings, illustrations of sort of these scenes from, I suppose it was his, maybe his own experience in a sense, or his own milieu in sort of a working class Baltimore neighborhood, which I think is where he came from originally. And so he did paintings of like guys fighting in parking lots, and like of people sort of praying at a vigil, and things like that, where the dark of the velvet was used sort of as an integral part of the image. And it's such a deep and rich dark, and when you strike with the right kind of intensity against it with your paint, the light becomes so very, very luminous. I think that's part of the appeal. That's the appeal even to folks who, again, kind of unironically enjoy those kinds of paintings. And again, I think they're kind of cool, but that the appeal is that luminosity, I think, or part of that. And he took like full advantage of that, and he made that his whole thing. He made that his career. I mean, he has a very successful career. If you're teaching at my alma mater, you're doing all right most of the time. Well, that's not necessarily true, but because they did, of course, just like in a lot of schools, there's a lot of issues with adjunct faculty and people not having benefits and all this other stuff. But he was full-time faculty, so as far as I can recall, and whatever the case, he was hired for having been a fairly successful artist. So I suspect he does all right with that kind of work. And there's a place for all sorts of stuff out there. Like I said last time, there's a place for Bob Ross and Thomas Kincaid and Salvador Dali, most certainly. They're all, some people deride them, some people adore them, and I think maybe both have merits, but why not be positive instead? And why not sort of err on the side of, at the very least, appreciation? Even if you don't enjoy something, appreciate it. And I don't know where that particular tangent came from. Because at this point I don't remember what I was talking about or what I was doing up prior to starting that tangent. But I think that's a very important statement to make. Editorializing is my whole thing, probably. Let's see. So right now it's all very, very abstract. I kind of like, my thing, or one of my things when I was painting a lot more than I have been lately, was actually abstract cityscapes. Like, not quite this style, although not too far from this either. So it's possible that I might end up somewhere in that territory again. That's sort of a familiar territory for me. And as you can see already, I'm kind of making some stuff up as I go along, even though I am using a reference. And that part of the reason why it's kind of interesting to work with a very sort of, in my case, blurry in a way reference. I mean, it's actually not blurry. If I zoom in, I can kind of get some pretty decent details, but I'm keeping it kind of intentionally blurry, so I'm only seeing like the basics of it. And one of the things is the sort of abstract forms that emerge. It's kind of fun to experience that and watch that develop. And I think this is actually pretty fun. I like this. It's, again, photorealism, especially considering that we have, we're in a time-limited situation. I don't have a hard limit set for my videos. I suspect that maybe about an hour would be standard. It's possible that it could go longer. It's possible it could go shorter. But that's kind of the general kind of territory where I want to hover. So there is definitely limitations there. And those are, both intentional and unintentional. I mean, I could go on forever, but I could. But considering the fact that even as it is, I don't know if I'm torturing anyone who's trying to listen to this. I don't want to sort of put that out into the world. It's the same reason that I did get some drinking water for myself, just in case I got parched, but I resisted the urge to bring a bowl of snacks down, like, cranberries or, I don't know, candied treats. I like candied treats. And I really wanted some, but I'm gonna wait until after the video because I care about your well-being. And I feel that maybe hearing the noises, the crunchy noises that I make would be less than optimal. I mean, we're already at a less than optimal situation here, but, no need to make it any worse than it has to be, right? Um, okay, so I'm pretty alright with my mock-up right now. I mean, again, it probably does not resemble at all the realistic image, but that's okay with me because now I want to kind of get wild with it. By wild, I mean, I'm gonna just do my thing and just sort of try to create my own kind of image out of it. Again, as I say, like abstract landscapes were my thing. A lot of them I did from imagination. I didn't really even use. Uh, I didn't really use references. I don't know how I forgot that word. Today is going to be fun. As I say, sometimes you just kind of you're not necessarily feeling it, but you got to give it a try. You got to do the best that you can. That's what I'm trying here. I'm just going to do the best that I can for today. So I didn't even use references. I just made stuff up, like weird places, cities that obviously don't exist. And usually they would have some sort of apocalyptic theme to them. I really kind of enjoy that, and we'll see. Considering that the Tower of Sauron showed up last time we were painting, anything could happen, I think could be very interesting. I've always been fascinated with eschatology. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. So it's basically the study of the apocalypse or the study of end times. I think it's a kind of fun, unless you're experiencing massive amounts of anxiety in relation to it, which I also do. So when I was very little, I found out what nuclear bombs were. Like, I just found out what they were. I didn't know. I think there was a thing on TV, and I think the thing on TV was it's an anime, Japan. Oh, I mean, Japanimation film or episode. It's called. Oh gosh. The character's name was, I think, Gen or Gek, and he was a boy, and he lived in. Oh gosh, it was either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and it was based. And I've since. Uh, mm, I had the name. I knew the name of this thing because I mean it's considered to be it's a very respected sort of uh, entry into the anime sort of oeuvre. It's high art, I guess. It was, I think, originally comic manga. It was based on the author's own experiences because he actually lived through the atomic bomb. Um, I don't know. I mean, if I have show notes at the bottom of the page, I think someone out there might know the name. And the character, he was a boy, and he lives in one of the two cities, and the bomb drops, and yeah, it's horrible. And I think some of his family survives, and then they have to kind of make it after that. I didn't really keep watching because, oh my god, that traumatizing that the atomic bomb scene rendered in maybe needlessly graphic. No, I guess it was needed, but it was rendered in graphic detail. Very meticulously, I think, by the artists of that animation. Um, that just finished me off for a long time. I think I think I spent that whole night just sort of laying in bed and shivering and freaking out. And then when I discovered Nostradamus, I had a similar experience because I was like, oh no, Nostradamus was right about all these other things, clearly, because that's what they said on that special. Well, it was like kind of like one of those Discovery Channel, History Channel type specials, but you know, before that was a thing. This is like a very clearly like paranormal type show. Like these are weird things that happen in the world. Today we're going to talk about Nostradamus and you know, um, and it was not like meant to be scary or serious. It was just meant to be fun. But I was a five. I don't know how old I was. 7 years old or something. I don't remember. And come on, no, not for kids. The apocalypse is not for kids. I thought we were all gonna die because I mean I was young. I still believed in magic and stuff. I thought Nostradamus was totally legit, and who knows? Maybe he actually is, but well, probably not. Um, just don't, kids. Like it was an accident that I saw either one of those two things, but you know, it's hard as a kid dealing with the apocalypse. But since then, maybe one of the ways that I've kind of coped, because it has been a massive anxiety for me for a very long time. Probably, I probably freaked out every single time I heard an airplane go by overhead, which in this particular area is often, very often, does an airplane go by overhead. Um, I would freak out. Like I would have a little mini panic attack every single, like internal. I would usually, kind of hold it together. But like, let's say if I was in class, in school, and maybe the sun slanted off of a reflective surface, and I saw a little flash in the corner of my eyes. My heart would start beating, and I would just kind of get like grab my desk and prepare to die. And I did that probably up to late middle school, early high school. Like I never told a lot of people until recently, now that it's kind of just a funny story and not like a perpetual fear that I live with. Um, anyways, since it was a big deal for me, one of the ways that I cope now that I've sort of, or since then after I had sort of, gotten, I guess, old enough to manage those fears and put the lie to some of them, and tell myself at least that the chances of that happening were probably low-ish. Um, is sort of get immersed in these kinds of things and like actually become fascinated by, occult type subject matter, not in like 100% practicing kind of thing, just as a sort of scholarly, pursuit, like, totally as a hobby, and get immersed in that and get fascinated by it because it's fun and interesting and weird and like especially in art, there's so much of that out there, so much eschatological art, and so much art that deals with the divine and the spiritual and the apocalyptic, that it's just a really interesting, ripe subject. So I would kind of put my own spin on that, and I had a lot of apocalyptic cityscape paintings where things would sort of look like they were melting, and falling apart, and also like uniting into one, because like apocalypse means revelation, and that sort of the let's say the unmasking or the unveiling. So I like the idea of things, the end of things being also sort of a moment of clarity, where things make sense suddenly, you know, where all the horrible stuff in the world suddenly you understand. You find that elusive divine truth behind everything. Uh, that's I think that's a very attractive concept for many reasons, and that might be why so many um, why there are so many apocalypse cults out there, and so many people so often kind of buy into the idea that the rapture is coming tomorrow or next week or this year, even though it pretty much never does. Ultimately, what it's actually all about is when you die. I mean, everyone experiences well, whether they remember it or actually experience it or not, everyone goes through a personal apocalypse, and then, when they actually shuffle off this mortal coil, whatever happens afterwards, I don't know. Um, and of course, everyone experiences all kinds of transitional, revelatory events throughout their lives. Some good, some bad, some bad but with learning potential, some just bad. And that's also part of it. It's part of the fascination too. It's part of the metaphor, I guess, or the central. If you're gonna kind of turn that into a metaphorical language, right? So I'm really into it. Uh, I like. There's a couple of different themes that I like consistently, that I just consistently return to. Apocalypses and revelations is one of them. Subterranean labyrinths. I'm super into subterranean magical. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about that noise. However that sounded too, it must have been awful. Magical subterranean labyrinths. They have to be magical, or that's important, I think. I mean, like, just a sub. I mean, just a cistern underground. That's still pretty amazing. But like, you have to at least feel like it's magical. Like there has to be like, maybe a mystery or something to solve. I don't know. I like dungeon crawler video games for that reason, because I think there's a really nice symbolic, metaphorical element there that people don't always notice necessarily, or it's not necessarily intentional, but it's cool. And I guess flight. People in black robes and possibly white brimmed hats flying. That's pretty cool. So psychoanalyze that. What's the deal with that? Why? I don't know. It's pretty cool. The imagery's cool. You know, like, I mean, I kind of talk about the whole apocalypse thing. Maybe a fear of change. I don't know. Maybe that's part of what it's reflecting. I used to be like really afraid of aliens, like, because there's this other theory. I think that there's a particular group of aliens that are gonna come down and like accept us into the Galactic Federation. And I was like, oh, cool, that sounds great. Like, yeah, why not Star Trek? But then I think the weird History Channel-esque special went on to say that it's like, oh yeah, but we'll have to give away our give up our human forms and sort of become a different species, or like transform into something totally different, and it'll be a completely different age. And then I was like, but what about, but we look fine now. I'm used to the way we look. I'm used to this. Like, what am I? I'm gonna be a lizard or something? I don't want that. Like, I don't want to get used to everyone looking different. How am I even gonna recognize them? What about television? Is there still gonna be television? I liked television at the time. You know, I rarely watch it now, just because YouTube is a thing. Like, subscribe if you're enjoying this. Go ahead. Why not? Like and subscribe. It's all down there. Things I don't know. But yeah, that's a thing. Like, those aliens trying to turn us into lizards. I'll have none of that. Thank you very much. All right, now I'm totally like abandoning any relationship with this source image outside of the clouds. I think I'm still having trouble kind of blending here. The blend. Maybe I need to more loading and less thinners on that one. Yeah, I don't know. It's just fun. The apocalypse is a fascinating thing, and I think watching civilizations, as sort of shells, and wondering what went on there and what goes on there every day, if it's something that's still standing. Yeah, I like watching like sort of a cityscape. And what was that feeling? That one of those special words they always come out with on the internet. That's like the feeling that the sudden realization that everyone in the world, every one of those lights beyond the bridge, or every one of those lights on that house across the way, or that building across the way, represents, a different human life, and that that particular human, every single one of those humans goes about their day, completely and utterly independent from your existence, right? And has their own extremely complicated inner life. Um, that's that darkness. I think, was it called Soul Sonder? Was that what it was? Something. It started with an S. And the thing is, I would look it up because this is the age of Google. But the way that the format of this, the so-called format of this so-called program, is that I don't do that. I don't want to switch out to a different window. Um, I'm just gonna keep keep up with this painting stuff, and so I just kind of have to wonder. I'm sort of in my own little magical bubble right now. Yeah, that was not a good color. Well, I mean, it was a good color. Everything's a good color. All colors are good colors. I'm just not loving it. One nice thing about, well, any kind of painting, actually, painting is actually relatively forgiving, especially oil painting. You can scrape things off and, try things again, especially when it's still wet. You do sometimes have to wait. This is why oil paints are maybe a little bit less forgiving than, say, acrylics. You do have to wait for a fair amount of time sometimes if you make a lot of changes and you want to glaze on top of that, or if you want to sort of add a color that's like a direct bold color without blending. You might have to wait for things to dry a little bit, and oil paint can dry for a very long time. A thick layer of oil paint actually takes about 40 years to dry, so you wouldn't be waiting for 40 years. I think this one a little known fact, right? It takes about 40 years for like a glob of oil paint to fully dry. Now, obviously, it may seem dry fairly quickly, but there's going to be bits and pieces if you poke through it that that haven't quite gotten there. And the surface though, hardens and dries, within hours to days or something along those lines. It can depend. Also depends on the color and the chemical content of that color. From what I can recall, titanium white takes a much longer time to dry. The earth tones usually dry much quicker. So burnt siennas, burnt umber, things like that, they will tend to dry a lot more quickly, which is why a lot of times you would see people using those, well, for a couple of reasons, but those are very good for underpainting. If you're doing real life oil paint, like physical oil paint, you would maybe start off with burnt umber and burnt sienna, because those very quickly dry it down, so you can kind of lay down a base and kind of sketch things out, and then start painting on top of that with other colors. It also makes for a nice, rich kind of tone to start with. Okay, and again, I don't actually know what I'm doing here. This is actually starting to get really close to what I used to do, is those weird, and I think, it's going to start getting even closer. I'm going to go all the way now. In fact, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get rid of this reference. I'm going to use my mouse for a second, and I'm going to say remove this reference. It's gone. Complete imagination now. This is the world of imagination. Yeah. But one of the things that I do want to mention is I talk about oil paint, and one of the reasons I don't do the physical form, obviously it would be more difficult to record. That's one thing. But secondly, just in a general sense, why I don't do it myself, just for production or for creativity or for fun or whatever, is because in the place that I live right now, there's no adequate ventilation. That's the sort of initial thing, and you do need adequate ventilation to work in oils. This is an important public service announcement, everybody. I think this is like, hopefully you know this, but there's a lot of people who don't. I think it's something that isn't talked about enough outside of like art school settings, maybe. Um, if you read the label on a tube of oil paint, you will know that it literally says, from what I can gather, I think almost verbatim, that this product is known in the state of California to cause cancer. That is not a joke. That is very true. And, these are lead-based paints. They are carcinogens. So, since we're talking about death, you want to try to, yes, maybe you will ascend to some perfect unity when you die, but you want to probably stave that moment off for as long as you can possibly manage, right? So, just a little public service announcement there. Be very careful with oil paints, because I know they look really fun, and they kind of are, but and especially if you watch some of those like painting videos, like Bob Ross makes it look really fun. That's one thing I can absolutely 100% give him. Like, that's his big thing. He makes it look really joyful, and it can be, but I'm sure he must have done a video at some point. I didn't really ever see it, where he kind of talks about, safety procedures, but you do need to follow safety procedures. A lot of people become very cavalier with that, especially with a lot of mythology surrounding artists, and how artists are supposed to be like kind of iconoclasts who don't care what's up, and they're just, yeah, I'm just gonna express myself, and I'm all, a badass, and blah blah blah, and I don't need to eat, and I don't need to charge money for my work, because I just eat art, and I eat paint, and I eat sunshine, and I photosynthesize my energy. Those things, first of all, are not true. That's not real. And secondly, it's very, very dangerous, because that kind of image can create this cavalier attitude in young artists, where they're just like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. Oil paint, I'm just gonna eat this glob of it right now, because I'm like, if Ozzy Osbourne can bite the head off a rubber bat, I can do whatever. I'm just gonna stand in the middle of traffic and paint cars as they approach me, at full speed, because I'm a badass. No, don't do stuff like that. Take some precautionary measures. And with oil paints, if you are interested in them, it's really fun. There's a lot of really great features and qualities that they have that I can't possibly get into with this, because this is a very different medium. This is digital oil. This is basically digital oil painting, but digital oil painting feels and works fundamentally different. It's wonderful too in its own ways, and actually has a lot of versatility and fun stuff you can do with it that you can't do with physical painting. But I can't really, instruct on it, so to speak. And again, this isn't really intended to be instructive. But there's a lot of great things about it. It's just a wonderful experience in many ways if you're into that sort of thing. If you like the way that physicality of the paint feels, but lead-based. It's lead-based. It's lead-based paint. It will kill you. It will kill you. If you breathe the fumes, it will make you very sick. If you paint in a studio without adequate ventilation, so if you, set up a studio in a basement or in a small apartment or something, as I have seen some people do who were not aware of this stuff, who were good amateur artists, or even amateurs moving into professionalism, or some, in some cases, people who have moved into professionalism but just have not, by which I mean like the ability to make money from their work. That's pretty much strictly how I would define it, really, other than maybe intent. An amateur is someone who loves what they do. It is not by any means meant to be pejorative, and it often is used that way, but it's not meant to be, because it really just means one who loves the work that they do. think I forget the exact Latin or Greek origins, but that's pretty much where that word derives from. It derives from the idea of love. Um, but someone who is not trained in that notion, they just kind of think this is the same as Crayola. The same as like that sort of fun Crayola paint that we get, when we're kids. Um, Fun brand, great for kids. I'm pretty sure they. I mean, obviously you don't want your kids eating it, but I'm pretty sure that those have very different safety standards than quote unquote professional quality oil paints. You will get sick, you will get oversensitized. Eventually, you might develop some serious long term conditions if you do it for a long time. Don't. Uh, Acrylic paints are fantastic if you really need to work in an enclosed space because they you don't want to eat them again, but they have a much more forgiving nature. They are not nearly as dangerous. And digital painting is also fantastic because aside from the dangers of of technology and artificial intelligence becoming self-aware and coming to get us, and it will someday, and that's one of the apocalypses that is in store for us as a species, I'm sure. Despite that, it's relatively safe. I'm not really afraid of touching any of the things that I paint. Not that I can, not that it's even an option, right? But you can get some really great images done that way. If you're looking to make images, there's actually a slight difference between making images and making paintings. I think that's a little bit of that is semantics, a little bit of that is elitism to a certain extent, especially when one becomes sort of derided in favor of the other, and that does in fact happen, unfortunately, in the art world. Like painters, a lot of times deride illustrators because illustrators, quote unquote, sold out, and they're not hardcore enough because they make money and are trying to make nice images for people to enjoy. And maybe illustrators, I'm less familiar with that world, might be derisive of painters in a similar vein. I hope not, because painters are mean. And maybe I hope illustrators aren't. But illustration is fantastic. Illustration is great. Um, and painting's great, and they could be the same thing, they could be different. When you're doing digital painting, you don't get an object out of it. That's the thing, you don't get an artifact, and that's where it is different. And some people really like the idea of that artifact, that original, that non-reproducible original. Uh, I forget who's the guy who wrote that. There's a really interesting essay. It's called Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction from way back when. Oh gosh. Is it Burgess? No. I don't know. I don't, this is not supposed to be. Come on. Whatever, Let's enjoy ourselves. Whatever, right? I don't know. Hoity toity. What trying to bring up some fancy schmancy stuff. What's the deal with that? A really cool thing you can do. Well, I mean, maybe cool, I don't know, but I'm not gonna keep this. But one of the things you can do with the digital format is you can hold down Control, and boom, you get a perfect straight line if you really want one. Um, I'm just sort of defining some basic shapes here, and some of them don't really need to be defined. I'm just sort of creating some archways. I think the sky is already kind of where I want it to be. It's obviously not a realistic sky anymore, and it's almost very patently unrealistic. It's very stylized at this point, but I think it's conveying that sort of sense of looming inevitability that that I like so much in eschatological content, So why not? Why not? And then this is used to be the downtown of my city, but I'm just redoing it. It's not even because why? Why not make it into some sort of bizarre fantasy civilization that has already crumbled recently, but structurally has remained intact in many places. So maybe all the people are gone, but the structures have stayed in place and are only now are in the process of becoming reclaimed by the elements. So we're not really far into the apocalypse here, maybe the rapture has just come and gone. I've been playing a lot of Fallout lately. If you're into that sort of thing, you know what I mean. It's a video game. If you're not, it's a post-apocalyptic setting, although a very bizarre post-apocalyptic setting, post-nuclear, which is not here because really wouldn't be quite so well preserved if it was a nuclear event. Nuclear apocalypse, of course, is my greatest apocalyptic fear. Zombie apocalypse, well, one, I guess it's probably doesn't really seem very plausible, so I don't really think about that very much. I don't quite get that fascination. Don't really. I mean, like, I can understand it, but it seems a little bit flat as maybe even as a symbolic structure for me. I get, like, it's fun, I guess, but like, I think it's important to remember that none of those things are things to be desired necessarily. I think a lot of times there's an escapist fantasy that's involved with sort of apocalyptic thinking, and apocalyptic media, where you always imagine yourself as one of the people who's in control and surviving, or one of the I guess bits of the appeal. One of the appealing things about it is just the fact that you're sort of suddenly and without any not consequence, I guess, but without any blame, without any personal blame, you are plucked away from your personal responsibilities. And obviously that I can sort of see as being weirdly liberating, but ultimately I don't really look forward to an actual eschatological event. I don't think it's really super healthy to, but I mean, to each his own. I guess I've known some people who, have found a lot of comfort in that whole 2012, December 21st, 2012 scenario, because, they saw it as a very spiritual idea, or they chose to interpret it that way, that it was like, we were all gonna meld into one consciousness, which again I find terrifying. I don't want to be part of everyone else's consciousness. Get your consciousness out of my consciousness, I say. But I think it can be appealing to some people. I think maybe it's just one of those thoughts that you could have, in a dark moment, and maybe there's a certain element of catharsis to it. But I don't think it's really the best thing to do to glorify the idea of loss and death. I think life is, something that we have, whether or not we love it or don't love it, and it's kind of the main thing and the only thing. So, to wax vaguely philosophical there. That's the beauty of, I think, this format for me, and it's gonna very very easily, I think, eliminate the folks who are not interested in watching. I think that's gonna be the majority of the population, but you never know what you're gonna get here on Hey Let's Art. You never know what's coming next. Could be the Tower of Sauron. Could be the end of the world coming up all of a sudden. Theoretically, we start off with just a regular run-of-the-mill cityscape painting, and then we get weird with it. And again, note, not photorealistic, not intended as photorealistic. Not even at this point. This would be closer, I would say, in style to maybe the surrealists or like proto-surrealists, like maybe De Chirico. He's a major inspiration for me. I'm a big fan of De Chirico's work, and you've seen it. I you know, I would put this up on the screen or something, but I'm too lazy to do that. But he did these very sort of high contrast, again, not very realistic in terms of proportions or attachments or architecture. Often they were like purposefully kind of askew or slanted or dreamlike. A lot of arches, a lot of deep shadows, deep dark shadows, high contrast imagery. Um, and yeah, this is very, very similar to the kind of work I would often do. I did a lot of that kind of stuff during college as well, like something very similar to this. And what I would also used to enjoy, I think, and this is something that is a little bit, more valued, I guess, and also kind of easier to pull off in the physical oil painting format, is I would enjoy sort of blending different types of strokes and different types of images, or different, I guess, levels of rendering together. So certain parts would be very, very tightly rendered, and certain parts would feel very loose. And I kind of like doing that on purpose. Or like, for example, I would you can kind of do something similar to that, like, but I might, like, for example, do like something like a flourish like that somewhere in a painting, or something like this, where everything else up until, and I think I might actually keep this little flourish, everything else up until this point is kind of very, you know, not realistic, but at least sort of volumetric, and then I kind of go in with some flat lines here. Some very, very flat imagery, just very, very, very loose. And I go ahead and look at that. That's weird, right? And interesting. Okay, so you know what? I think at this point, I don't know how far we've gotten in terms of time. I suspect I've actually gone over an hour, but I might be under. I don't know. And clearly, this is still, like, as usual, a little bit of a mess. But I'm gonna kind of call it here. And as with the last image, I may very well come back to this one in the future and refine it a little bit further. Getting a start, getting going, kind of experiencing the process, making bad, weird looking stuff that doesn't make sense. I think that's if I were to want to instruct in anything, I think that's what I would want to instruct in, because those are things that I'm sometimes, if I can manage to get there, if I can manage to motivate myself to get that start, those are the things that I'm good at, making weird, bad looking things. So, here we go. We're gonna probably, I am not satisfied with this at all. I think we're going, although I love the way that these loops sort of are simulated. And I'm really starting to like a lot of stuff about it, actually. But and it looks pretty good from a distance, and that's a good sort of sign of, that you're on the right track compositionally. But I definitely am very, very far from happy. So this is probably something that will come back in a future episode. I'm just gonna kind of play it by ear and do whatever I want any given day. So maybe next time I'll do this, or the last one, maybe, and most likely I'll do something totally new. Maybe I'll start off the first half working on an old piece, and then the second half of the show working on the new piece, because nobody's telling me what to do. This is my game right here, everybody. This is I am my own man, and this is my domain. And if you don't like it, that's cool. If you do like it, apparently you should subscribe and press the little thumb thing. Apparently that's good. People like that on YouTube's. You put the little thumb thing and you press it, and yeah, subscribes are good, I think. And very, very importantly, because I'm not really monetizing the YouTube thing itself, but I am trying to monetize my work in a larger sense. I do have a Patreon, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Oh no, what is this? Oops. This doesn't, this needs to go away. I don't know. That mark was, I don't know, whatever. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I do have a Patreon. The link is going to be at the bottom of this page, and it's probably going to be at the, or rather below the video, and it's probably going to be below every single video from here on out. And I really do appreciate folks who are able to pledge to that, because that's a way that you can support creators and artists that you like, or whose work you're interested in, and tell them that in a very real and tangible way that that work is important to you, or that you want more of it to exist and to continue. It definitely creates motivation, I'll tell you that much. Helps really motivate oneself. And as the pledges go up, there may be certain like milestones that unlock, quote unquote, different possibilities, like for me to be able to afford some extra equipment to make the sound better in the future. That could be dependent and contingent on some of that kind of support. So really, if you're into this, if you're watching this, listening to this, I generally prefer people, just donate a small amount, $1, $5, whatever they can. It comes out per project, so every time I would release a new video, that's generally when I would charge, but it's charged once a month at the beginning of the month. So you can set it up, you can set up limits, so you can set up that you pledge about $1 per thing, and then you will probably end up being charged about $2-3 a month. If you do $5, you'll end up maybe being charged $10 a month, something along those lines. And me doing this video as my main sort of Patreon thing, I think will allow me to also do some larger long-term projects that may not, be something that I can release every single month or once a month, but something that may take about 3 months or 6 months. And doing a smaller project like this, where I can just kind of release a couple of these once every couple of weeks, allows me to fund those theoretically. Now it's still very early in the process of funding, but and of course it's going to take a very long time, but it is something that I am not going to lie, I am aspiring to. To get that going, to help me build a more sustainable financial situation. And just want to thank everyone who has already pledged. I really do appreciate that. You exist and you're real, and there's several of you. I'm just that actually blows my mind, and the fact that you've been with me and been patient with me. But as I was setting up and getting ready to get this project rolling and getting ready to get other projects rolling, it just means it means a lot to me. Okay, now I can't stand to look at this anymore. This is horrible. Oh my god, that goes against everything I've said this episode. But I need to end this. And my kitty cat, I think, is scratching at the door, and I need to give him some love. So I will talk to you guys later.